So the skills that you're learning doing that are very, very different than skills that you might learn having to operate on the streets of Moscow or something to that effect. And so now the question is, do we have those skills that we need now today to make this pivot back to sort of great state competition? Are we prepared to take on Russia and China and other authoritarian regimes where you really are moving back more to a more Cold War type of approach to running operations? Because it's a sophisticated enemy. Like I said, it's much more strategic intelligence, so it might take more time to get some of that information. And it's being fought here on the streets in Europe, in America, in places just right around us and right under our noses.
Alex Finley, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I actually wanted to start with an article you wrote a few years back on CIA officers playing the game Homeland based on the TV series.
Mm-hmm. That's a while ago. We went back in the files.
I'm good at systematically stalking my guests before the interview, so I figured I'd dig up a quote from this article that I actually found really interesting. So for people who don't know, Homeland, the game is based on Homeland, the series. And in the game, you have CIA officers, terrorists, and politicians. You could be one of those three people. And you wrote, everyone has his or her own agenda. This struck us as the most true to life part of the game. And you're also playing this with two other former CIA officers. We were competing against one another, and the key to the game is to keep your quote-unquote true agenda hidden. This is probably closer to real life than the game creators ever intended. So I wanted to ask you, what makes the true agenda part of the game the part that struck you as most real life, and why is that such a close part to real life in the CIA?
Well, I think this was a long time ago. Let's see if I can remember. I think there was the whole part that each role, right? Because you had the terrorists, you had the analysts, you had all the different sort of players in the game. So of course they each had their own agenda. But even those, the sort of joke for us was that even within CIA, individual officers can have their own agenda as well. You do have some who are just straight up bureaucrats. You have others who are careerists, looking to climb the ladder and move into bigger management positions, and others who are just sort of out there ready to do the work. Not that any of those is necessarily mutually exclusive, but that's it. Everybody has to have their own agenda, and you don't trust anyone.
So the thing that they say in the movies, trust no one, is that also applies within the CIA itself, like everyone having their own agenda?
No, not really. Within the agency, of course, you learn who you can trust and who not to trust. The camaraderie actually between CIA officers is pretty spectacular, because, we do go into really strange situations and dangerous situations together. And these are the people that you're relying on. Of course, it's normal, as in any bureaucracy or any large organization, that there's competition, because as you move up, of course, it's a pyramid, and fewer people are getting promoted. But I think really you need to and have to, and you do trust the people who are right around you.
So did it feel like a game itself trying to move up in the CIA? Like you could trust the people on your team, but in terms of maneuvering for a position or trying to elevate in that bureaucracy, does that have its own game aspect to it that may be a little bit different than just a typical corporation?
I would say it's like any other corporation, actually, that, you find a mentor, or you find somebody's coattails that you might be riding on. And there are people, who are looking to move up and in any way that they can. I think that's normal within any organization.
When, or rather, what were you doing? What was your job before you ever decided to join the CIA?
I was a journalist.
What type of journalist? What type of stories were you covering?
I was doing a lot of political reporting mostly, and found it not all that interesting, actually. I I was probably a bit naive, and I thought, I was going to go change the world. And as I got deep into the media world, I realized that's a game too, and that's very competitive. And politicians in DC use the media in their own ways, and of course, media also can use people for access, and it's its own game that didn't interest me, and I was much more interested in getting into bigger international policy type of things.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing to hear about when journalists talk about the relationship. Political journalists talk about the relationship between the journalists and the politicians, because there's so many independent journalists now that are covering politics, but back in the day, the options were much slimmer in terms of who were you going to write for, where were you going to have a voice. And now hearing independent journalists break off and then talk about kind of like the bullshit on Capitol Hill and all the things they had to deal with, and I don't know, I just find it really interesting. There's this show, Breaking Points, that I listen to. It's like my only political podcast indulgence, with Sagar and Jetty and Crystal Ball, and they used to work for The Hill, and just hearing like it sounds like a weird dynamic sometimes, and kind of trying to shuffle ahead into just asking questions, like waiting hours and hours and hours in a room to possibly ask one question for half a day. Like, I don't know. Is there anything interesting or fascinating from that time that sticks out to you when you think about it?
Well, I just thought it was really weird, like the media scrum. I did work on Capitol Hill, and so it was sort of this media scrum that would, like a pack of dogs, I used to say, that would follow Newt Gingrich around or something like that, just to get in, and all of us sort of asking exactly the same question. And of course, the response was very scripted. I mean, that's part of what you learn, and that's why you develop other sources and not just, getting it from the politicians themselves, because it does become very scripted. It becomes a little bit like play acting, right? Each side doing sort of what's expected of them. But that's sort of a veneer of a story. And then you have to dig in and really get behind the scenes and get other people to talk, to get really deeper into what's actually happening. And so, yeah, I mean, in a way, everybody is playing everybody off. But I would put a word of caution to this sort of new trend of independent journalism. There is also something to say for legacy media and having editors and having fact checking and having a real system in place. It can be slow and arduous. It's not always perfect. But I do fear sometimes that some of these sort of independent journalists who come in and just report things, that they feel like reporting, and it's not necessarily going through the same sort of rigorous check. And that's how we can end up with some not so great information out there as well.
Yeah, I guess that's the downside to having such a low barrier of entry to publish something that looks official online. You have your headline, you make your own website, everything looks legit, but it could be based on pretty crappy evidence or no evidence at all. And yeah, I mean, I typically fall on the side of, I think having a bunch of independent journalists is a net positive for gathering information. But I also see the argument for when you have so many people trying to do the same thing and cover the same story, and everyone's trying to have a radically different take or a popping headline, that eventually you run out of shit to say and you just start saying shit so people click on your story about, Tim Cook and doing things in China with Apple rather than the 10,000 other stories because you want to just get people to click on it and not necessarily provide the best information. So I could see it both ways.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the political, I guess, play or theater aspect. Would it be correct to say being a Capitol Hill journalist is a little bit of theater?
No, look, there's some really good ones out there, but like I said, those are the ones who know to, develop their own sources and get behind the scenes and get the real story. I think just starting out for me, it was very surprising, how these talking points came out and how, there was sort of what came out from all of these offices, which was very different from what was really going on. And it just takes time and experience to learn that's how it works. I was, I think, just young and naive and idealistic when I went in.
How much of your job was tracking down politicians or CEOs in hallways and then sticking the microphone in their face, and as they're walking, you try to get an answer? Because I feel like that is just like when I think of as a dumb lay person who's just watching that stuff on TV, that is the image that I have in my mind of that type of in-person interaction where someone's walking and you're trying to get a soundbite from them. And usually they have a pack of people that surrounds the person you're trying to get to. So they're not saying, no, I won't answer your question, but they have like 3 people that form a shell around them. And then you ultimately can't really get anything out of them. How much of that was part of what you were doing?
Yeah, that was part of what I was doing. That's part of what still happens there today. And you see it. You see the scrum, like I was saying, this sort of pack of dogs following the Speaker of the House around or something like that, and sticking a recorder in their face and asking for the soundbite. Because, look, you have to get them on the record answering some of these questions. That's part of the job. But like I said, then you can go and do additional reporting behind the scenes and try to get other information as well. But, there is also value in getting the politicians on the record responding to a specific question. So that is necessary to some extent as well.
How easy is it to parse through the BS of a pre-thought out response from a politician versus what you think may actually be happening? Because I imagine most politicians have something in their head that they're going to say. They more or less know the types of questions that are going to be asked, just like any other, I guess, short form interview. How easy is that, or how hard is that to parse through what's actually happening because of those pre-worded kind of like just like going through it with a whole team?
Yeah, I mean, those are talking points. They have their talking points that they have to put out. And so you report the talking points, but then you go, like I said, and you develop other sources and you get deeper information so that you can tell a bigger, fuller story.
So what made you tired of journalism? Or not journalism, but Capitol Hill style journalism?
Yeah, I was just I didn't love Washington, D.C. I didn't love congressional politics. I was just much more ready to do, like I said, international and national security. That was much more where my interests lie.
And what year was it when you eventually broke away from D.C.?
So that was when I joined the CIA. That was in 2003.
Okay. So you go from Capitol Hill to the CIA building. How does that connection happen from journalism?
So I think actually there are a lot of similarities between journalism and working in intelligence, because in both you are you're trying to develop sources, you're trying to get information from people, and then you're dealing with the veracity of that information. Is it good information? Is it bad information? So a lot of the skill sets actually are very similar. My my trip into, to get into CIA is actually not sexy at all. I keep thinking I need to come up with a better origin story. I just knew somebody who worked there.
You could start now. You could come up with the
I
greatest
really
lie origin story. I won't even include the original story.
I got to think of something better, but it really was just, I knew somebody who was there who recruited me and said, you'd be good at this, so come and do this. And I was going, okay, that sounds interesting. And then it worked out, and I joined. That was it.
So was there a period where you were in limbo at all, just kind of looking for something else to do? Did this person scoop you from Capitol Hill, like while you were still a journalist, or like, because I'm trying to imagine what I would like if I was in that situation, just going straight from journalism to the CIA. I don't know if I could do that, just like one right into the other. Was there any period in between?
No, like I said, that they're actually very similar. So it's not such a huge leap.
What was the recruiting process like into the CIA?
I'm not going to go too much into that. Nowadays it's they go to schools, they go to universities, and they recruit people. And I think you can apply just online. Like I said, in my case, I happen to know somebody, and he kind of brought me in, but I won't go into the specifics of how all that happened.
Oh, sorry about that. My webcam. Oh, never mind. There's a blinking light on my webcam. I just want to make sure it didn't stop recording. Sorry to cut you off. So obviously you can't really go into much detail on the recruiting process itself, but it was more or less you went straight from journalism, and there's also a crossover between journalism and the CIA. There are a lot of similarities.
Yeah, like I said, that in the end, you're just dealing with information in both jobs. So they're actually quite similar skill sets.
What was did you go into the CIA with a specific role in mind? And what was that role?
I did not. It was a leap of faith. I wasn't really sure what I was getting myself into, but it seemed interesting and fun. I ended up in the Directorate of Operations, and which I think was a good place for me. I speak a few languages, and I'm not one to want to stick to just one subject, which is kind of what analysts do. The analysts really know a very niche subject, but they know it incredibly well. I more like the idea of, getting to know a whole bunch of different things, and each day is different. So I ended up in a good place. I ended up as a reports officer. That's sort of a bridge between the analysts and the operators. So I would work with analysts and other, what we would call our customers, the consumers of intelligence. They would come in and say, okay, here are all the things that we don't know. Here are the things that we want to know. And then I would turn to the operational side and say, okay, how can we get this information? Do we already have sources in place that can get us this information? Are we developing people that might be able to provide this for us? And then you have to also formulate the questions, how you can ask the questions to get the intelligence that you want without giving up your vulnerabilities, without giving up to anybody. We have a gap here that we don't know. So how can you ask the questions, and how can you get that information without giving up your own vulnerabilities? Then there was a separate section, sort of the information flowing the other way. Then a case officer would go and collect that information, and it would come to somebody like me who would help to finalize sort of the raw intelligence report about it, validate a certain amount, the intelligence that was coming in and the asset. So does it make sense that this source was able to provide this information? Does it match any other intelligence that we've gotten? Is it corroborated by any other sources? Does the information make sense? Sometimes you get this information, it just simply doesn't make sense. And then pass that information then over to our analysts. So I was that bridge in between the two sides.
So as you, the report officer, you are going back and forth between the intelligence, which are the guys back in DC, or
The
mostly
analysts. The
analysts
analysts.
back in DC,
Yeah.
and the operations, which are the agents in the field. The case officers are the people in the field.
Yeah. So they're not agents. So the agents are our sources or our assets. So they're officers.
Okay. Okay, that's so
Has
FBI
agents.
agents
It's
would
huge.
be
Yeah, I know. We
okay.
all have all of our different lingo, and it's all very confusing. But yeah, you don't call a CIA officer a CIA agent, and they'll correct
Okay.
you every time.
Got it. So yeah, as you should, because that's important. So the agent would be the source.
Yeah, the
The
person that you're handling.
the case officer would be the person in the field. So they would be the spy, I guess, if people are thinking about it that way.
Yeah, yeah. When you
And
think of
then
spying, you're thinking of a case officer.
and then you have the uh, intelligence or the analysts back in DC. And so I'm just trying to get it straight in my own head. So and then you're going back, you said, as the bridge between the analysts in DC and the case officers who are not agents. They are developing agents as sources, and and that can go two ways. So you're going from the analysts to the case officers, or you're going from the case officers to the analysts.
Correct.
Okay, so customers, you said you are developing information for customers. What can you say about the customers? Who are the customers?
Well, generally, our most immediate customer are the analysts within CIA and within other intelligence community agencies. But of course, your ultimate customer is the president, right? So you sometimes it's anybody who's consuming intelligence. So National Security Council, and then, like I said, ultimately the White House.
That's such a weird way to refer to someone who you're trying. I guess I'm used to hearing the customer just in terms of someone works at CVS and someone goes in there and they have this whole choice of what they're going to buy, and they're the customer, and it's not a professional relationship between the person selling it and the person buying it. But to hear the president and other agencies as customers, is there competition between who's going to have the best intel, and the president's basically like, I'll go to whoever can give me what I need, like in that sense as a customer, where you're trying to sell the best intelligence? Or is customer more just like, we called it this, it's not really a buyer selling relationship?
No, it's not a buyer seller relationship. It's just thinking of who's consuming the products that we are creating, right?
Okay.
Each intelligence agency has a very different role. So it's not, look, what NSA collects is very different from what CIA collects, which is different from what, military intelligence collects. So these things are all very different. And in the end, the policymakers on the National Security Council and in the White House, they're using all of it. They're putting all of that together to get as good of a picture as they can to put together whatever policy it is that they're going to put together. But ultimately, the White House, the executive, is putting together policy. But in order to create that policy, that's where they're going to pass down their requirements. Here are the things that we want to know. And they'll prioritize it and say, these are the things that we really want collection on in all of its different forms. And in getting all of those different types of collection intelligence together, that's where you get a real finished product. So the other thing to keep in mind, where I was in the Directorate of Operations, the reports that we put together are raw intelligence. So it's very rare, and it's not a good idea if raw intelligence itself makes its way up to the policymakers. So that's why normally it would go to the analysts first. And then the analysts do what we call all source intelligence, where they're looking at the raw intelligence that we've given them, but they're also taking intelligence from all kinds of other sources, including open sources, including from satellite imagery, including from everything else. and they put all of it together to create a finished intelligence product. And that generally is what then would go up to the National Security Council or the president. There have been some cases, for example, in the war on terror, where you're working with a little bit more what we would call actionable intelligence. So it's something that we think that this person is going to be in this place at this day, and it needs immediate response from policymakers. That's a little bit different. But generally, when you're talking about sort of strategic intelligence, the Directorate of Operations is bringing in that raw intelligence. Then the analysts take all of it and put all of it together into a finished product.
Okay, so you take the raw intelligence from the people in the field, from the case officers, and then you package that, and then you give it to the analysts, and they're the ones who go over it before it goes to someone like the president or another agency.
Well, they write their own products. Yeah, they write their own reports using our intelligence, but using other intelligence as well that comes in from hundreds of other sources.
Do you have any say in the finished intelligence product from when you hand it off to the analyst, like sort of an editor, overseer like that? Or once you hand it off, it's just like you're done and they can package it however they want?
When you have some of these products that come out of across the intelligence community, things that come out of the Directorate of National Intelligence now, that we have this sort of big overseer of all of the intelligence community. Generally, the owner of each bit of intelligence, if it's going into a larger product, they get to sign off on it. So something like a national intelligence estimate, which you've maybe heard about in the news. Occasionally they'll write a really big intelligence estimate on a very big subject, North Korean nuclear weapons or something like that. And I'm making it up. Yeah. But, and so then...
It sounds official, though.
Yeah, it sounds, sure. And so then, intelligence from all of these different agencies is brought in. And so then that product then circulates among each agency who has contributed, so that they all can sign off and agree, yes, this matches what, the information that as we understand it.
And you said the actionable intelligence is intelligence that you need to act on soon, like within 24 hours or something like that. Does that tend to be raw?
We think Bin Laden will be in this place on this time at this day and time. Something like that.
So I guess there's no way for that to be finished intelligence. Like that would be raw intelligence. That's
but there's still other way. Of course, you're building up a case, right? I mean, you're not going to base it off of one single intelligence report and you're going to go drop a Hellfire missile or something. So, those things are still built up over time to make sure that it's good information when you get it.
So how much pushback do you get from politicians and other policymakers that they hear about through certain channels a piece of raw intelligence and it aligns with something that a politician wants to do? So do they ever go, okay, like we have enough, that's good, and you have to tell them, yeah, that's not finished intelligence, we can't just act on this right now? Do you have people that are sort of just hunting for the intelligence that they want to use to corroborate their political moves, or would politicians not really be able to do that?
I would argue that the invasion of Iraq was that. The policy was already created, and then they backfilled with intelligence to support their case. But if you actually look empirically at all of the intelligence that was provided, it didn't necessarily lead you to the conclusion that this was going to be the correct policy. But the White House had made that policy and therefore cherry-picked information to support that policy.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that. I guess this could be a good spot to get into the war in Iraq and 9/11, because I believe you joined the CIA in between those two when you got recruited?
Yeah, in
So
early
early 2000s.
2003. Yep.
So there is I mean, it's not a notion, it actually happened. The CIA was blamed publicly for not stopping the 9/11 attacks and supporting the misconceptions that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. So I wanted to ask you, we can start with 9/11. Was 9/11 an intelligence failure? Was it not an intelligence failure on the part of the CIA and other agencies? Kind of what happened there?
I don't think that it was an intelligence failure. I think that the policymakers had been informed that there had been this increase in chatter, as we call it. It was very clear that something was coming. The problem is that policymakers, first of all, already have their agenda. We had a brand new administration. That was George W. Bush had just come in. They were very much set on looking at anti-missile defense system, and it was very difficult to get their attention on anything else. And when you come to them, as I understand, George Tenet did, saying, "Hey, we are seeing increased amount of chatter about this," but I wasn't in the agency at the time, but the agency couldn't say exactly what was coming or when it was coming, and policymakers don't like that. They don't like when they don't have all of the information. They don't like when it's a little bit muddy and murky still. And like I said, they already had their agenda laid out. And so it was very difficult to get the attention of the people who should have been giving that attention. But I would argue that the intelligence was there.
So that was a case where the president had an agenda and the CIA was collecting intelligence, not I want to say as normal, because it's such an abnormal, horrific event, but there was intelligence collection going on, like raw intelligence versus finished intelligence, and the president was looking for intelligence that fit his agenda that may not be the best intelligence, or kind of cherry picking which intelligence they chose to listen to?
Well, I can't speak to, what was going on inside the White House at the time, but, certainly the agency was collecting information on bin Laden. I believe there was even a finished intelligence report called Al-Qaeda Plans to Strike in the United States, which went to the National Security Council. But, you can't, you can lead the politician to the intel report, but you can't make them read. So why they made the choices that they made, I can't speak to that.
Yeah, so I was 10 years old when 9/11 happened, so I didn't actually start looking into the news and the reports that were circulating around that time until probably 3, 4, 5 years after, as just a sophomore in high school, going like, oh, what actually happened? And like the conspiracy theories started to drop and all this stuff. But I do remember there was a clear, a phrase that people used. This is back in the early mid 2000s, was that there was a failure to connect the dots between agencies, that there was a bunch of different intelligence gathering, and the FBI had their stuff, the CIA had their stuff, the State Departments had their stuff, and this was the narrative. I'm not saying this is true, but had all of that information been together and connected and overseen by a single department, that theoretically we had information that could have stopped 9/11. I remember reading articles in that vein that talked about connecting the dots and how we actually had the information but just weren't putting it together in the right way. Is that something that you saw on your side? Is there any truth to that narrative?
Well, I came into the agency after that, but that definitely. That is definitely one of the things that the 9/11 Commission found. That is what led to the creation of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. I didn't agree then. I don't agree now with the existence of that office. I think that office has done a better job than it did in the beginning. It's found its way and it's become a bit more efficient. But it really is an extra layer of bureaucracy that I'm not sure that we needed. The director of Central Intelligence, the head of CIA, sort of was envisioned originally as that point man or point person to play that role. But that's it. Because of exactly what you said with the 9/11 Commission pointing that out, that was what led to the creation of the DNI.
Okay, so that happens before you come into the CIA, the transition in offices.
9/11 was before I came into the CIA. Yeah.
Yeah, but the office transition when everything.
The change within the intelligence community was in 2004. So I was there at that point.
Okay, so the WMDs in Iraq was something that you were in the CIA for about a year or two.
Well, I came in January of 2003. So I mean, by that point, that train had already sort of left the station.
Okay, so to go into the public perception of the WMDs in Iraq being an intelligence failure, that we went to war on the back of. Okay, so power of editing. So to go back to the WMD narrative in Iraq back in the early 2000s, which you were actually in the CIA for, or you were there while the wheels were beginning to turn. The narrative that we went to war in Iraq with faulty information, or that the U.S. public was even being lied to about intelligence. I remember there's a lot of things circulating around that time about the U.S. looking for any excuse to go to war in Iraq. When you look at that narrative of the public perception, was there truth to that narrative? Was there a sort of intelligence failure in the CIA or with the U.S. intelligence agencies as a whole, or was it more of in vein of what happened with 9/11, that the intelligence was the intelligence and the intelligence was just not being handled properly?
Well, let me preface this by saying, I mean, I'm hardly an expert on that period of intelligence history, but my understanding is that the intelligence actually was very good, but the policy had been set. Dick Cheney, in particular, and George Bush behind him, had already made the decision that they wanted to go into Iraq, and so they were looking to sell that policy, and they picked intelligence. We were discussing earlier here the difference between raw intelligence and a finished product. And a lot of what they did was to take the raw intelligence and use it as they saw fit to fit their policy. Whereas, in fact, the finished intelligence, told a much clearer and bigger picture.
Yeah, it's as a politician, like, I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a policymaker. When you have a clear narrative of intelligence that is unfinished, raw intelligence, but it fits what you're trying to do. It fits the maneuvers that you're trying to make in office, and you know that it's not the best intelligence. But I could see how that could be tempting to want to disregard the finished intelligence and just go with something that's on your gut. And also, if you're a policymaker, you're not there during the collection process of the intelligence. So when someone's getting a package, I imagine, there's not the same attachment to the quality of the intelligence and what it took to get that intelligence and how it could be played out with decision making. There's not the same attachment to that intelligence as the officers actually collecting it and analyzing it. So if you get a just like a stack of files in front of you as a policymaker, and you have intelligence that fits what you want to do, and you know it's not great, you probably shouldn't act on intelligence that isn't finished. That doesn't seem wise, but I could see how that could be a tempting thing to want to do.
Well, I think in this case, it was they had a policy set, and for whatever reason, they thought that was going to be the best policy. And so they used the intelligence in order to create their narrative and to sell that policy.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's even that they were creating a policy and trying to support it with intel. It's that they knew this is exactly what we want to do, but now we just need to sell it to the public.
Got it.
And yeah, using raw intelligence in that way is a very bad idea.
What can you say about where you were based during your time in the CIA and any specifics about your role in that location?
So I was in West Africa and in Europe and at headquarters a bit. Yeah. And like I said, I was a reports officer, so I was working, I did work counter-terrorism issues along with some others.
Okay. And so obviously you can't go into the specifics of what you were doing, but is there anything interesting or fascinating just about that time in general that stands out to you? That's something that you could note that wouldn't be a breach of classified information or anything like that? Like just something about your experience there, something that stuck out as opposed to other experiences that you had within the CIA?
No, I think what struck me most is exactly what led me to start writing books, was sort of the absurdity of the war on terror, the absurdity of my role in it. And, it was a very strange time. Like we said, it was just after 9/11, just before the Iraq invasion. And so I was there for all of these changes, and it was a very strange time. And a difficult time, which was traumatic in some ways, just absurd and crazy in other ways, super fun in other ways. And all of that actually led to me, once I left, to start writing my Victor Caro books. And in fact, the first book really was the first book, Victor in the Rubble, is very much a catharsis of dealing with all of those different emotions of that time period.
Yeah, I have the first book right here, Victor in the Rubble. You guys should definitely go check it out. I'm about 100 pages in right now, and I could, obviously I don't have the experiences, but I could feel the absurdity of what it must have, just like a little slice of what it must have felt like in the moment to deal with some of those things in the CIA that make you want to absolutely bang your head through a wall, and just like the bureaucratic incompetency / things that don't make sense that you have to do / just like the interpersonal gaming to get ahead, and like what we were talking about in the beginning, where everyone has their own hidden agenda and you're not really sure what that may be. It's a hilarious and insightful read into a slice of what it must have been like.
I actually like using fiction and satire to sort of highlight realities, because it takes away that whole fear that I might be giving away some kind of a secret, and it just lets me get at some of the truths that I like to point to, and that I think the general public might be interested in.
Yeah, one of the through lines that I really enjoy is the way that you describe terrorist organizations, almost like franchises that have their own problems, and filling out paperwork, like terrorists showing up and on the first day of work and filling out things and going through the back and forth with their boss. And there's a lot of parallels between what the bureaucratic bullshit that goes on in the CIA in the book, and then the bureaucratic bullshit as part of a terrorist organization, and just like the hilarity of watching that unfold, I thought was very funny.
Yeah, but the whole thing started actually with this idea of one day one of my colleagues just got pissed off at work, and he was like, he had to fill out some form at the agency, and his response was, the terrorists aren't filling out any fucking forms. And I thought, well, that's actually pretty funny. What if they did? And so that sort of became the basis for Victor in the Rubble, was to take this bureaucracy that we had created for ourselves and put it on top of the terrorists and sort of see what happens. But of course, as we went on, and as these terrorist groups grew, we started seeing it actually playing out in real life. These groups really are now referred to as franchises. You look at West Africa, well, all across Africa now, right? You have ISIS franchises and Al Qaeda franchises, and they actually refer to themselves in that way. They sort of take the brand name of Islamic State or of Al Qaeda, but then they become, of West Africa, or of the Sahara, or of the Western Sahel, and they all sort of pick up their, using the big brand name, but then they become the local franchise, and then they change up how they do things based locally on where they are, what are the local grievances, and what locally do we need to be doing to sort of recruiting people to our side. So, and a lot of it is bureaucratic. I mean, especially with ISIS, we really saw when they were running, they really had a whole state within, Syria and Iraq. They had driver's licenses, they had IDs for people, they had their own logo. They really created a huge state bureaucracy. So, I was sort of making this up to make fun of how we were running things. But as we went on, I kind of now hope that the terrorists themselves, bureaucratize themselves to death and sort of to paralysis, where they're no longer able to function.
Yeah, like it eats itself from the inside, just because they don't want to deal with all the bureaucratic bullshit, and everyone just quits because they're like, I'm sick of sending 300 emails to make a cup of coffee and figure out who to deliver it to.
I just want to go out and, go strap on my explosive vest. I don't want 100 people to have to sign off on it.
Maybe that's how case officers should build sources inside terrorist organizations, that instead of trying to just directly stop them, they have someone introduce bureaucratic rules that eventually make them go insane. And then over time, they'll just stop.
Feed bureaucrats into the pipeline.
Yeah, you develop like an Al Qaeda HR person, and they go in and they just make rules that make zero sense. So
it's a good idea.
Yeah. I was thinking about franchises in the sense of sports teams, because I played baseball for about 15 years. And when I heard of franchise with the terrorist organizations, I started thinking about like the parallels to franchises as the owner of a Major League Baseball team. Like, I'm just imagining there's a draft board of terrorist free agents where the head is like, all right, like, we want to pick up this guy, and like, this guy is not a 5-tool player, but like he tries really hard, so like we'll put him in the second draft pick spot above this other terrorist. And like, you have billionaires that buy sports teams, just like there are, allegedly billionaires, whether they're involved in Saudi organizations or whatever, that are funding terrorist organizations. Like, all these parallels with the franchise to a sports team,
and they all start fighting over, like, he's the number one draft pick for explosives, and then he's the
yeah, exactly,
he's the number one logistics guy, and so everybody's trying to create the best team.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you have your own positions, you have your lineup, you post the lineup the day before you're gonna execute a terrorist plot, and everyone shows up at the office and like, shit, like, I'm not in the lineup today. But yeah, no, that was really funny.
That says like Boko Haram, like, yeah, I got in.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to read one of the excerpts from the book, And I have a bunch of highlights in here from things that made me laugh out loud, but this actually fits well because this has to do with the terrorist bureaucracy part. So this is, I believe this is a part in the book where there's a guy who's explaining sort of the rewards of becoming a terrorist. He's one of the heads of a terrorist organization. And he says, quote, "Our organization has grown so quickly," Mohammed said, as the slide on the screen changed. "This is very positive, of course, but it also means we have to alter our pathway to absorb our flourishing success. For example," he continued, "next slide, please. Next slide. For example, our martyrdom program has exceeded expectations and experienced 50% growth over the same period last year." He looked back at the men while they took in this statistic. "The downside, of course, is that it is very difficult to write lessons learned from our suicide bomber program. We also may soon run out of virgins in the paradise." Omar's men let out a collective groan. Omar glanced around nervously. The promise of luscious purity was one of the main reasons he had attracted so many young followers. So like the explaining of how things work in paradise, and like just going through it like a PowerPoint, like you would have to go through a PowerPoint being onboarded to Salesforce or something in the US. It was really funny. I'm reading it laughing out loud.
Yeah, I definitely had to get the PowerPoint in there. A terrorist with a PowerPoint presentation it's just a funny concept on its own.
So when you were in West Africa, are you allowed to write anything down in a journal or anything like that? Can you, if you see something that's hilarious and you go, "Oh, I'm going to write about that later," can you write that down? Or are you not allowed to keep notes on anything? Like, how did you sort of develop those ideas for the book when you were in the CIA?
I kept some cryptic notes. I mean, nothing classified, of course, but, just living in West Africa, of course, you have, very strange experiences and adventures and things that happen and stuff. And so that I definitely journaled. I wrote down, we did some crazy road trips and drove into the Sahara and did some crazy things. And so, culturally, what you're seeing in some of those experiences, of course, I did sort of keep track of those things. In terms of the crazy anecdotes, people would say funny stories, or I would experience something crazy on my own. And I would keep sort of, cryptic notes about it. But of course, I always knew I was going to change it up. I wasn't ever going to use an exact story, or so I claim. So, the point is playing with it in the fiction and playing with it in satire. Like I said, so that's to highlight those absurdities, but do it in a way where you're not giving away any secrets.
Yeah, I have a theory that you never actually left the CIA, and you're the first satirical writer on the CIA's payroll that's using humor to destabilize terrorist organizations.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just a very long covert action plan that I'm part of.
Exactly.
No, I can't imagine the paperwork that would go into planning something like that, and the number of lawyers that would have to sign off on it. It would be way too much a pain in the ass.
Yeah, like to have someone actually working in the CIA that is using humor to destabilize, like that would be, I feel like that's what a 19-year-old would want to do now if they join the CIA, with everything being online and tweeting and being on TikTok, is like you need someone who specializes in the Twitter format of destabilizing organizations like a terrorist group. Like the CIA is just hiring a bunch of 19-year-old TikTokers to tag terrorist organizations in that like make them go insane, or just somehow paint a narrative, and using the social media landscape today. I could see how being a satirical writer and using humor could fit into that. But and obviously I'm joking, like the CIA is not gonna, hire the lead writer of The Onion or someone like that. But I could see how those skills could be useful in the world we live in today, because everything is online, and if you make a good meme, that is gold by today's content standards, getting that shared around.
Yeah, but we're seeing it in the real world. If you look at the war in Ukraine, the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, and they have a Twitter account, Ukrainian Meme Forces. They're doing it, and they're fantastic. They're great at creating memes that just make fun of the Russian military or make fun of Putin. They do a really good job with it. And yeah, in fact, a lot of this is exactly what we're seeing in the hybrid war. So that's actually book number 3, Victor in Trouble, the book that came out this year, deals a lot with that, with online presence, disinformation, and propaganda. And that a lot of that grew out of what where we saw, sort of Russian influence coming into U.S. elections, and running these different memes on Facebook and organizing people on Facebook without them realizing that it was a Russian behind it who was actually organizing them to show up and protest something. And so I think over the past few years, we've really started to see, what you said, these are skills that we're going to need. It does kind of feel like, oh, I'm just shit posting, but it's a real thing now that's happening because you're setting a narrative. You're setting propaganda, or you're discounting propaganda, or you're running a disinformation campaign, or you're trying to counter one. So that's a real aspect of what we're seeing today in these information wars.
Yeah, shit posting. Could you see the CIA running some sort of program where they're hiring the US's top shit posters on Twitter, TikTok? I have a few in mind, because if Ukraine and Russia and other countries are doing the same thing, it only makes sense that you would want an army of your own shit posters that have the skills to fire back and even supersede the shit posting from the other country, or even take those shit posts and then use it against them. Could you see like any sort of program like that in the future, where we're basically just training people to shit post to other countries because they're doing the same thing to us?
I hope so, because I think it's actually a very important part of how we're fighting these wars, because the information narrative is so important today. So I hope that we have some kind of a presence there. I have no idea if we do or not, but I would hope that we do.
Yeah. So going off of what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, I actually wanted to ask you about Russian intelligence and influence, because I know you've done a lot of work and writing in that area. And to kind of go from the KGB back in the Soviet Union to, I believe it's the SVR today, that's the Russians' intelligence agency. Could you talk about how you understand the evolution of Russia's intelligence agency and their goals going from the KGB to today, and how that compares to what the US is doing or attempting to do?
I don't think they've changed much. So the KGB, now in Russia, you actually have the SVR, which is their external agency. And then you have the FSB, which is their internal intelligence agency. And then you have GRU, which is their military intelligence. But I would argue for all of them, their objective hasn't actually changed very much. I think, when the Soviet Union collapsed back in the early 90s, the end of history was what we were talking about. That's it. Now everybody wants to be democratic. And of course, we're seeing that's absolutely not the case. And we're starting to see a backslide now towards authoritarian regimes. The people surrounding Putin are very much from that world. Putin himself, of course, was a KGB officer. The people around him also sort of grew up and came into power through those same levers and those same networks. So how they're doing business is how they've been doing business all along. Really, it has become the intelligence apparatus sort of running the state. But even more than that, it's much more like a mafia state, where every lever of power and every lever of business is sort of at the state's control, to carry out the state's objectives, which in the end are Putin's objectives. So unfortunately, in a way, it's like the KGB, never really died and just sort of took control of Russia.
So they've pretty much kept the same mode of operations from the Soviet Union to today. There hasn't been much fluctuation on Russia's part.
There isn't. And even if you look at sort of their tactics that they're using, it's all very same. Disinformation and propaganda was very much around even during Soviet times. Targeted killing, same type of thing. So, we don't see too much of a change. It's really very similar modus operandi. It just, the technology has changed.
Okay. And so if you go back to the United States, the Soviet Union falls. We then get into 9/11, the Iraq War. How does the U.S. start to go about things post-Soviet Union?
So I think when the Cold War was over, I think, the U.S. really thought, like I said, the end of history, that's it. Democracy has won out, and everybody is, once they experience democracy, they'll never want to go back. And then there was sort of, this free for all. The problem within Russia was that there was very little understanding of how to do capitalism, right? And so it was capitalism run amok, where the people who had already sort of been in power kept that power, and they were the ones who got access to owning all of the shares of Gazprom or owning all of the shares of Lukoil or whatever. So it was sort of the same group of people that were making all of the money and were still sort of in charge. So, but the US was making tons of money off of it. Europe was making tons of money off of it. And that's it. It was a capitalistic free for all. And everybody thought, yay, this is great. Everybody is democratic now. And I think it really took a while to understand that what was happening wasn't just capitalism, that in fact, there was massive corruption on a massive scale that was going on here. And that eventually this was going to backfire and lead to somebody like Putin. And then, yes, like you said, we in the United States were very much caught up in fighting a war on terror and then fighting in Iraq. So we really, for 20 years, this sort of great state competition idea, it didn't exist. We were very much focusing on the war on terror, which is a very different policies and, of course, different intelligence collection and different intelligence operations. And while, of course, there was always a presence that was looking at Eastern Europe or at Russia or at China, the focus really inside the policy community was much more on the war on terror for 20 years. So for an entire generation.
So we have the leftover Soviet era style intelligence gathering, like the more traditional intelligence gathering in the US, but then we also branch off and then we focus a lot of resources on the war on terror. So that is like we're trying to keep up the traditional spycraft, but then we're also putting a massive amount of resources into whatever it takes to spy in Afghanistan, Iraq, those places.
Yeah, so I actually wrote an article about this for Politico magazine called How the CIA Forgot the Art of Spying, which looks exactly at that. So if you look at how intelligence operations are run in a war zone, it's not very clandestine. You're going out, you're armed, you maybe are, have military escorting you somewhere with big American flags waving around. And again, you tend to be getting less strategic intelligence and you tend to be focusing more on this actionable intelligence that we were discussing earlier. And the tradecraft that's involved in that, the skills that are involved in that are very, very different from if you're looking at running an operation somewhere in Russia or in China, for example. So the question is, because everybody in the CIA, for example, and most people would come out of training and would go to Iraq or Afghanistan, right? I mean, for 20 years, we were running people through these two war zones. And so the training that you get, and then the people who through that, those are now the people who are now managers, right? So we're 20 years in, those are now the people who've moved into management positions. So the skills that you're learning doing that are very, very different than skills that you might learn having to operate on the streets of Moscow or something to that effect. And so now the question is, do we have those skills that we need now today to make this pivot back to sort of great state competition? Are we prepared to take on Russia and China and other authoritarian regimes where you really are moving back more to a more Cold War type of approach to running operations, because it's a sophisticated enemy. Like I said, it's much more strategic intelligence, so it might take more time to get some of that information, and it's being fought here on the streets in Europe, in America, in places just right around us and right under our noses.
So if you were to take a look at the CIA's 2022 draft board of agents, you obviously would see a lot of, or not agents, case officers, spies. If you were to take a look at our case officer draft board, that would be full of the people who are trained how to spy in war zones. I'm guessing based on what you're saying.
Most people have that experience. Yes, they've been in and out of war zones.
Do we have a lot of people to call upon who we can throw up on the starting lineup that are trained in traditional spycraft? Did we continue to keep that program going in a full capacity, or did that sort of break off with the war on terror and we stopped really training traditional spycraft?
I think we were training in it, but I don't know that you have as many people who have real experience in it, which are two very different things. And the other thing to keep in mind is, going back to this idea of technology, right? The technology also has changed enormously in 20 years. So the type of intelligence war that we're sort of finding ourselves in now, while it has its similarities to the Cold War, it's also very different in many ways, right? You have facial recognition everywhere. You have surveillance everywhere. Biometric passports, right? I mean, it must be incredibly difficult to travel an alias now, because you can't cross a border anymore without a biometric passport. How do you operate in a place like China, where they have facial recognition absolutely everywhere? And then the pandemic, how has that affected things too? Because also now you have people who, maybe were traveling out of China to give us information, and now they can't travel. Or we had people traveling into China, and now we can't travel into China. Or, for 2 years, it was, very difficult to travel to a number of places. And so how does all of that affect what information we're getting and how we run intelligence operations? So it's extremely complicated now. But the good news is that, a place like CIA, tends to recruit creative people. So for all the hard time and, crap that I give it about being bureaucratic, you do have some very intelligent and creative people inside who are willing to think outside the box. Now, whether you can get the lawyers and the bureaucrats to agree to do the thing that's outside of the box is a different issue. But you do have that creativity to think about, okay, well, how can we do this and still succeed?
I know you said you can't go into specifics about the recruiting process, but is there anything you could say in a general sort of way of how they test for creativity? Like, how do they know that you'll be able to take a bunch of information and act on it in a way that maybe other people wouldn't be able to see if they weren't as creative?
I mean, there's a whole psych evaluation and things like that. But also, in training, you're put in very strange situations and you have to find creative ways out of them. So it's a lot of just, on the spot thinking and out of the box thinking.
Yeah. I actually have a few excerpts from the article that you mentioned, How the CIA Forgot the Art of Spying, and it's fascinating. So people should definitely go check it out. I'm going to link this in the podcast as well. So to go into the kind of the change from traditional spycraft to the war zone spycraft, you talk about that when you write, quote, there was a perceptible change in the culture inside the agency. Espionage is traditionally a nebulous practice that creates what the intelligence agency community calls, quote, a wilderness of mirrors, and that thrives in a foggy, less defined environment. Spies tend to like working in the shadows. In the war zone, CIA officers were constantly partnering with military personnel who generally prefer a more precise definition of the battlefield and want to maintain a strong show of force. As more and more CIA officers spent time with their military counterparts, I watched a more military-style mentality seep into the agency. Back at headquarters in Langley, we started to see CIA officers show up dressed in cargo pants and Under Armour shirts. Buzz cuts seemed to appear everywhere. So, can you talk a little bit about that, the transition from your perspective inside the CIA as the traditional spycraft was being taken over by the war spycraft in terms of like what you were seeing going on, like techniques, focuses, things like that? Is that anything you'd be able to go into?
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly what I wrote in that article. Yeah, look, everybody was going to the war zones. I mean, it was just, it was churning people out and sending them into the war zones. And so that's what everybody sort of grew to know. Whereas, I had grown up in the Cold War and on the lore and the legend of CIA, hiding in the shadows in Berlin or something like that, in Moscow Rules and, this sort of very, tricky, spy craft, but also, gentleman spies where, everybody, there was a little bit of respect between the KGB and the CIA, for example. And this war on terror was completely something different. It was, go out, find somebody and, put together a target package so that the drone could go and drop a missile on them, or, how to break up the cell before they attack, some Western European city. So, it's just two very different types of doing intelligence, different types of tradecraft. Both, of course, are important. It's not like the war on terror has gone away. Mm-hmm. So, being able to do some of that is still necessary. And, there are probably lessons in how we did do intelligence in the war on terror that we can apply now today. But again, just to go back to that technology piece and, how much of this is being fought in the cyber realm, how much of it is being fought with information narratives. Like it's really completely changed. So while you do want that sort of traditional tradecraft operating in, European capitals or even in Russia, there is this whole new level of having to operate online and in the cyber realm as well. So, it's much bigger than I think most people realize, this sort of intelligence game that's being played right now.
Yeah, creating that wilderness of mirrors in the digital landscape, the social media landscape. Like if you were having trouble following that deception in person, I can't imagine trying to navigate all the things that someone can do with anonymous accounts and VPNs and on the dark web. And just like if you were tracking someone and you saw that person in 1980, you had a pretty good idea that you could identify that person and that they weren't cloning themselves somehow, unless they had a really good lookalike, a doppelganger. But you could now be literally 10,000 different people on the internet if you wanted to. And you can make it so it's pretty hard to trace it back to your original identity. So I can only imagine what that must be like for officers today in the field going online and trying to put together all those mirrors and looking for pieces of information, and at the same time also trying to cast deception of their own and trying to create that from within.
Yeah, and I think it just creates, like you said, like total chaos, for sort of normal consumers of information. So not only can you create, thousands of different accounts and bots and trolls, but with AI, you can create a fake photo of somebody and make it look like that person is an actual journalist, and create a website that looks like a real journalistic website and call it something very similar to ABC News, but it's, something just a little bit off. AI can generate stories now which sound pretty real, and then of course there's tampering with video, where you can change. There's a MIT, I think it was, did a demonstration where they took a video of Obama saying what he actually said, and then they showed how it was manipulated, and they changed what he said. So it used to be, if I can look at the photograph, then I have, I've confirmed something, and that's just no longer the case. And so, it's very, very difficult now to confirm what is true. It takes a lot more time. It takes a lot more resources. And that's going to be keeping the intelligence agencies, I think, very, very busy. But I think also we need to think, bigger in terms of our, society and community-wide, educating people in how they do consume information in this kind of a world, where we're not just getting our news from Facebook or from TikTok, or we need to understand that video might be, faked or tainted in some kind of a way, or, the guy contacting me for something might be, not at all who he or she says that they are. So it really has become it has become that wilderness of mirrors for everybody, not just within the intelligence community. And so I think one of the big things we need to do going forward, like I said, is much more civic engagement and much more education in terms of how to consume information, check sources, and make sure that we're understanding the information that we're getting.
I need to check out the video with Obama. I haven't seen that, actually.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I don't remember what it is he's saying, but they do it just to show. And but we've seen some examples of it now. More recently, there was one. I think it was Nancy Pelosi, and they didn't even change what she said. They slowed it down to make it sound like she was slurring, and then they put it into their own narrative and spread it. And you still will have people saying, she was drunk or losing her mind when she said that, when that's not at all what happened.
Yeah, that was actually Nancy Pelosi, though. It's just slowed down in the video. Have you seen the deep fake of Tom Cruise on Instagram, TikTok?
I don't know that I've seen that one, no.
So there's a guy who does deep fakes of Tom Cruise, and he also does a really good vocal impression, which is what sells the video. And he has a similar stature, but his face is completely deep faked. It's taken from, thousands of images of Tom Cruise. And then I'm not sure exactly how you craft a deep fake that's that believable, but it's mapped onto this guy's face in a way that looks like almost exactly like Tom Cruise. There's a little bit off, like it just doesn't look right if you look at him for too long, but if you just watch 30 seconds of it and send that to someone, you could easily get someone to believe that that's Tom Cruise. And this guy, he cooks in the kitchen as Tom Cruise, he golfs as Tom Cruise, he looks into the camera, says like Tom Cruise shit from Top Gun. Really funny. But that was kind of it was awesome from a creative standpoint, but scary from an intelligence standpoint, because once you get to the point where that information could be, or that sort of deep fake deception could be done for something like $100, how do you even acquire, like, how do you even know the difference between raw and finished intelligence? Like, that, to me, that would be such a mind fuck of trying to decipher who is who, and not even from an intelligence standpoint, but even just something as a a podcaster, like someone just pretending to be you and recording a podcast, and then a clip of you circulating online saying something you didn't actually say that makes you look like a piece of shit, and someone else is trying to do harm to you. When that starts to happen, I don't know. The technology will actually obviously evolve to defend that along with the deepfakes, but it's hard to see a society in which that doesn't just totally collapse the trust, like any trust online.
Exactly. And that's why it's so scary, because without that trust, right, that's how democracy collapses, because, you can't have democracy unless there's an agreement on what truth is, because, the bottom line of democracy is rule of law, and all of us agreeing what those rules are. And so that involves agreeing on what truth is. And when you start messing with that, that's how you end up sliding away from democracy and towards a much more authoritarian system where chaos rules, and the strong man says, I'll come in and I'll fix it. But in fact, then uses those very tools against his or her own people. So that's why I think we're at a very scary moment, actually, of history. And I'm not convinced it's going to get better before it gets worse, unfortunately.
What do you think about the notion that TikTok is just a Chinese vacuum, basically, to suck up identities? Do you think that, I mean, if the CIA was trying to get people's identities and information, they could just make an app that's addictive and get it from other people. When you hear people talking about TikTok, like this is just a deep state Chinese ploy to uncover as many identities and information as possible, get close to people, do you think that's actually happening, or is that just overblown and like maybe there's some surface level things going on in that vein, but for the most part it's really just a social media app?
I think that's actually happening. And I say that because we've seen a pattern of behavior from China. We saw it as they were trying to build 5G networks. We saw it with Huawei, that was putting sort of backdoors into their products. And so we've seen, like in Russia, it's same in China, that it's, a private business is not a private business. It very much has to answer to the state, and the state is going to take advantage of it as much as possible to get whatever it needs out of it. Which is why I think we shouldn't be doing business with a lot of these places. And then, to flip that around, you asked, well, could the CIA or something set something up like that? I think what a lot of people forget within the United States, of course, is that we are a democracy, and we do have oversight. So, we may not be perfect, but we try to learn from our mistakes, and we do try to correct them. So absolutely, there have been excesses in the past. And, but, in the end, we do try to address those and hold people accountable. It's not always perfect, and it doesn't always work. But to run a covert action program now requires congressional approval. It requires congressional oversight. It requires a presidential finding. So there really are checks and balances within a democratic system which allow for that kind of a policy to go forward. That's not the case in a place like Russia or China, where they could set something up like TikTok to just hoover up all of the information, and they don't have to get permission from anybody, and they don't have to tell anybody about it. So those are differences between how an authoritarian regime would run a surveillance program versus, something that an American or a European intelligence agency could run.
If you could put yourself in the shoes of a Chinese agent that is working with TikTok to try to get information, and you don't have the same checks and balances in the US, what would be sort of your modus operandi to acquire that information in terms of how you're filtering it? Like, would you just be looking for people who are close to politicians and try to get at them through adjacent relationships? Are you tracking children of powerful people? Like, how do you think that's happening on the inside, if you could give your best estimation?
Well, my guess is it's everything, right? You just want to have as much information as possible so that you have it if you ever need it. So if it then comes down to, person X is now, too outspoken against the Chinese government. All right, what information do we have on person X that we might be able to use to convince this person otherwise, or to, shut this person up, or to threaten this person, or whatever, or to discredit this person. And that's when you dig in. So it's not so much targeted at the moment. It's kind of taking in as much as you can so that you can, you use it when you need it. I've heard this and other types of things being described as wiring for sound. Right? You're putting that infrastructure in so that when you decide you want a speaker here or there, you've already got that network in place.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, it basically just planting social media microphones, essentially, you're casting a wide net as many places as you can. You're probably throwing away 99% of it, or at least not using it. And then that 0.1% that you can use, that comes from just not really filtering the information at the onset, but just trying to get as many people as possible.
Or you hold it, right? You don't know.
Yeah.
It may not be useful information today, but in 5 years or 10 years, it might be useful information.
Do you think with the landscape that we're in now, knowing everything you know about what's happening, or how the CIA operated when you were still part of it, and then you think about deepfakes, AI, dark web, all the things that are going on today, do you think you would join the CIA if it was the same landscape? Would that be scary? Does that seem salacious? Do you think you'd be drawn to it, or just be like, fuck that, I don't want to deal with everything that comes with that?
No, I think it's probably a very interesting time to be involved in it. I think it's still very bureaucratic, but I think, like you said, it's probably an interesting time because there are such enormous challenges. It's one thing, the Cold War was its own thing, and then the war on terror was its own thing. But now we're in this sort of new phase with new threats combined with old threats, and the old threats have been changed a bit with the new technology and new skills that are needed, but also some old skills and old expertise that's needed. So in a way, it's a very interesting time, I think, to be getting into it.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back to Russia for a little bit, actually, and to revisit the Art of Spying article. So in terms of Russia versus the West, you write that here's the unfortunate irony of that transformation, going back to the transformation from the culture in the CIA from traditional to warcraft spying. Here's the unfortunate irony of that transformation. Our Cold War adversaries hadn't actually gone away. While American attention was turned elsewhere, Russia had quietly continued applying its formidable knowledge of traditional spy tradecraft, using old propaganda techniques and its usual modus operandi of dangling potentially compromising material on subjects of interest. Russia has spent the past several years slowly rebuilding its empire, its great empire rather, and quietly undermining the foundations of Western democracy. Is the West screwed? Like, is there any way for democracy and trust to stay established if the online ecosphere keeps progressing in the same direction?
So the West doesn't have to be screwed. Right. So the good news is that it's actually in our hands to fix this. It's within our power. It's not up to Russia or China, for example. But we have to be willing to act, and we need our policymakers to act, and our leaders to lead and to act. So a number of things have to happen, I think. So first of all, like I said, I think we need better civic education, better understanding of how people consume information generally. I think probably there needs to be some amount of regulation online. I don't know what that looks like. I know it's very messy and dirty, and I'm not the right person to speak about it. But it needs to be addressed. Are these are Facebook and Twitter, are they platforms? Are they publishers? Are they utilities? What are they? But the same goes, for some of the open media as well. I think we need to address the idea of the world's richest people owning media outlets, whether that be a Twitter or a Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal and Fox News. I'm not for any single rich individual sort of setting those narratives.
So you're a huge fan of Elon Musk.
I'll leave my opinions on that out of it, but go on Twitter. You can see what my opinions are. But the bottom line of all of this is to go back to those basic tenets, those basic foundations of democracy, which is agreement on truth and rule of law and one vote, one person, and that requires all of us being engaged. That requires all of us understanding the information that we are engaging with. That requires responsibility from the people who are putting the information out there. And then it requires, our leaders to lead and also to speak the truth. And unfortunately, we have a number of political leaders right now who are much more interested in personal power rather than public service. And, until some of these things change on our own side, we're going to continue to see this slide towards away from democracy and towards a more authoritarian rule of law, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you in the fact that I don't think it's a good idea for any one powerful person to own an entire social media platform, because it seems like it would be impossible to have checks and balances and be able to make the best decisions possible if it's owned by a single entity. And I also have no idea what that solution may look like. I know on Twitter, people have thrown around the phrase a lot, town square. Like Twitter should just be a town square where people go in, they say what they have to say. Other people in the crowd say what they have to say. I guess the moderator would be the person who's at the podium at the town square that's just like trying to keep everything in check. But then the question becomes, with billions of people on a single platform, how do you maintain the right to free speech and vocalizing your opinions like the town square seems to be a place for, and then also stop disinformation, propaganda, deep fakes, one person having 10,000 accounts. I don't know what, I have zero idea. That there are a lot of people much smarter than me working on that solution, but just like it seems like everywhere you go, you're either impeding on free speech or you're setting a precedent that could be dangerous in terms of eliminating someone from saying something that shouldn't be eliminated. I don't see how, I don't see the three-dimensional angle to that. Like, how do you get out of that spectrum?
Yeah, I don't know what the answer to that is either. And like you said, there are people way smarter than me who are debating that and looking at different ways to do that. This is it. Content moderation is very difficult. Free speech is a foundation of our democracy. I don't know how you legislate against, look, we have boundaries on free speech, of course, but it's very difficult to legislate, especially now in this online world where, there's parody and there's satire, but there's disinformation. So how do you write legislation that separates out something that a comedian like Stephen Colbert says, or like you mentioned, The Onion? How do you separate out which allows for that kind of satire and that kind of parody, but then, curbs the disinformation and the deep fakes when somebody can just say, oh, well, I was just making a joke. Well, but no, maybe it was propaganda. Maybe you were trying to influence an election. Maybe you were trying to influence how somebody views a certain candidate or a certain, policy. So I don't know. I don't know how you legislate that. I don't know how you control that. I agree with you. It should not be in the hands of one single rich individual.
Yeah, the comedy one is an interesting dilemma because you have people that are hilarious comedians on Twitter that will give outrageous takes that they're not directly threatening anyone, they're not calling for harm, but they're just saying like absurd shit that is hilarious because they're a comedian, and the funny part of it is that they would never actually do that. Like, you're saying something so absurd, and it also ruins the joke if at the end of every tweet you say, by the way, I'm a
Sarcasm font.
comedian, this is humor, blah blah blah. But then you also have people that are either comedians that are not as skilled, or they don't present themselves as comedians, that occasionally jump into the circle of, shit posting or comedy posting, whatever, and they say something wild, and then maybe it gets taken down, or maybe people come at them for saying it, and then they fall back on that it's a joke. And maybe it was a joke. I think people should definitely be allowed to make any types of jokes, like good jokes, bad jokes. You have to make a shit ton of bad jokes before you become good at making good jokes. But then you also have the group of people that tweet something or post something that's not a joke. They don't mean it as a joke. And then, like you said, that causes trouble. People come at them and they say, "Oh, like, I was just joking." They throw their hands up in the air, and they can always fall back on the fact that it was comedy and they didn't actually mean it if they need to dig their way out.
Yeah. So I don't have the I don't have the answer. Now we fix that. Like I said, I think it's all going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah. Who do you think is better right now in the art of shitposting? Is it Russia and China? Is it the West? Is it the United States? Like, who do you see is ahead in the game right now? If Russia's a team, China's a team, United States, or maybe another country is ahead, who's doing the art of shitposting the best right now?
I think the Ukrainians. I think they're doing a really great job. I think that they have a lot of experience dealing with Russia right next door. I think you see the same too, like from some of the Baltic countries who have this experience, being right next door to Russia and having to deal with the disinformation and the propaganda and sort of this constant menace. But the Ukrainians have really done a great job of shit posting and sort of, taking the wind out of the sails of the Russians, but also because it gets the attention of everybody else, right? We're all sort of watching, and it does a really good job of, I think, getting a lot of us to really root for them and to call attention to their cause. So I think the Ukrainians are just killing it right now.
Yeah, it gets other people to pay attention. I've seen a bunch of the hilarious memes that are floating around Twitter and Instagram that I assume come from Ukrainian accounts. I guess there's no way to ever know, but it's created in that vein. And I have no idea what it's like to be in a situation like a Ukrainian is experiencing right now in a war zone. I can say from my own experiences that when I see humor about a situation that is dark that I may be going through at a time, or something that I'd rather not be doing, just laughing about it for 5 seconds can reinvigorate me, and it flips on a switch, and that humor acts as a catalyst for action, and then I can, just looking at a meme or a friend telling me a joke can kind of flip me back into that mindset of, okay, let's just do this. So I imagine if you're at war and you need a spark of inspiration to keep going, humor is a great way to do that. And then also having other people support you because you're so good at communicating online. It's like you're getting twofold support from yourself, and then also people that are watching this go on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, everybody needs a bit of humor and joy in their lives, especially when they're really, in a shit place. So, and then to feel like you're not alone, to feel like people are, maybe can't be right here with us in the trenches fighting with us, but they've got our back and they're rooting for us. I think that makes a big difference.
So if you look at the shitposting campaign of Ukraine versus Russia, how do their objectives differ? Like, is Russia just trying to spin Ukrainians' propaganda? Like, they're both mutually spinning each other's memes and shitposts, or is Russia basically like, are they just ignoring Ukrainians' memes and tweets and things like that? Like, in the social media sphere, how do the Russian versus Ukrainian objectives look differently from each other?
I think the Russians are still sort of playing the old game, like a year ago game of just trying to set their own narrative, just trying to destabilize and just kind of, trying to, to get people onto Russian talking points. I mean, that's mostly what you see. So it's much more influencing in that kind of a way. What I think is so great with the Ukrainians is that they just make fun of them. I mean, they just take the piss out of the Russians all the time. And it's funny and it's fun. So it's motivating. But also because it takes down the giant, it makes makes people realize, like, they're not bigger than us. They're not better than us. And they're not necessarily going to beat us. We can beat them. We can do that by making fun of them. And by sort of taking them down a notch, I think you're making the enemy, a little bit smaller and not this big, scary, monster as much anymore. So I think the Ukrainians are really great at doing that. So it's not even so much that they're trying to set a narrative, although I think they do that as well. But really just taking the piss out of the other guy. And it's very effective.
So for your own personal consumption, is there anything with your knowledge of intelligence that you do to try to decipher what is actually real with the stories coming out of Ukraine and Russia, walking through shit posts and like trying to figure out, okay, does it seem like something that's being tweeted from Ukraine? Is this an actual story? Is this from Russia? Is this like someone from Russia trying to act like they're from Ukraine? With your knowledge of intelligence, how do you sift through all that content?
I think the main thing is to look at the source of the information and the motivation of the source. So there are reliable news and media outlets out there that I know to follow. They're not always 100% perfect. They're not always the most engaging and interesting, but you know that you're going to get very factual or as close to factual as you can get. That, again, that's not to say they don't occasionally make errors. They do. But generally speaking, you know that they're set out there trying, not with an agenda, except for to get as much of the real story out as possible. So that comes from intelligence, that comes from journalism, that comes from everything. Just knowing who the source is and what is the motivation of the source. And then, of course, corroboration. If you're finding very similar talking points, I mean, you can find examples of, academics who put their stuff out on Twitter and they'll show, 1,000 accounts, all of which use the exact same talking points, and they were all released within 1 minute of each other. Okay, so now you know that this was an organized campaign. And once you start seeing those talking points, now you can look and see, well, who's using very similar talking points, but, maybe, finessing them in a little bit of a different way. And so now you can start saying, okay, well, what do we know about these sources of information? And eventually you build up an expertise into, who you can trust and who you can't trust.
So yeah, a lot of cross-referencing, digging into the motivation, like you said, looking for clues, and then banking those reliable resources and then revisiting them to check other things. Yeah, it's so with that being said, there is or one of the talking points, I guess, of Elon Musk's Twitter takeover is to try to get rid of the anonymous bots, the anonymous accounts. And that seems like it would be a good thing to have an identity connected to an account so that you don't have one person tweeting out, 1,000 different things or from 1,000 different accounts. But at the same time, for people who are worried for their safety in a war zone, or maybe they're trying to trickle down information to the general public without getting caught, and it would be something that's good for the general public to know. Anonymity, I could also see as a tool to help that process along without that person being in danger. What's your take on whether anonymity should stay in some capacity on social media? Should it be completely eliminated? Should we have zones of the world where anonymous accounts are allowed, like places in the Middle East where people are tweeting about uprisings and civil rights, and then those people are then harmed because of something they posted on social media? Like, what is your sort of take on whether anonymous accounts should exist or not?
Yeah, again, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to answer how you sort of manage or legislate all of that. I don't know what the answer is. I think Twitter has been really fantastic, exactly for some of those reasons you just pointed out, that you can have real-time information, somebody on the ground releasing information and explaining something that's happening, which we then can corroborate from all kinds of different ways. But it may be somebody who has to do it anonymously, precisely what you said, because they may get in trouble for what they said. Their family may get harmed for whatever. So I don't know, but then, we want to get rid of the bots. We want to get rid of people having 10,000 accounts just to, harass somebody who says something that they don't like. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know what that looks like. And I think it's probably going to be a balance somewhere between the two. And I don't think we'll ever have it perfect.
Yeah, that's I guess that's the one absolute truth, is that nothing we do will ever be the final solution. As technology progresses, there's always going to be the next thing. And coming from the world of sports, seeing what's happening on social media, it almost makes me think about the problem with steroids in baseball, because I followed that intensely when I was playing in high school, and then also Barry Bonds before my time, like all the things going on with steroid use and people hiding it, and kind of like that wilderness of mirrors in Major League Baseball. And you have the agencies that are trying to track steroid use and test players and like keep everything cool and make everything fair, like on social media, like everyone's on like a fair standing ground. But then you also have these chemists who are creating synthetic steroids that are not being able to be tested for. So it's like this cat and mouse game between the agencies and the rogue chemists. And it seems like it's always going to be that way with technology, where you have whoever's overseeing Twitter, whether it's a billionaire or a collection of agencies, and they're trying to keep everything fair. And then you have these rogue actors that are developing new technologies on how to hack the system. And then you just have to constantly be playing catch up. I don't see a way in which we ever get to a place where the oversight organizations are ahead of the rogue technocrats. And I guess that's the nature of the game. When you're an organization, you're constantly regulating, and you have to go through much more processes just to make a single decision. Whereas if you're a group of 3 hackers in a basement, you don't need to pass through anything, and you might have more knowledge than the people working for that organization.
Right. But definitely you don't want you don't want that decision in the hands of a single individual, right? I mean, because that's very similar when you're looking at a government. You're looking at a dictator versus a democracy, whereas the democracy will be messy and not perfect, but at least there are checks and balances. And it may lean more this way for one period, and then lean this way for another period. But it's always sort of shifting, but people, trying to get it right. Whereas if you just have one person in charge, it's whatever that person says.
Yeah. I'm gonna go to the bathroom real quick, and then I want to ask you about Yacht Watch.
Okay.
So yeah, let's get into Yacht Watch, and we can end off on that. So what is Yacht Watch, and how did you become involved?
So Yacht Watch actually grew out of research for my third book, Victor in Trouble, which is all about Russian influence. And so I originally had been covering for a number of nonfiction outlets. I'd been covering the Russia investigation in the United States into Russian influence in the U.S. election. And all of that then started turning into my third book, Victor in Trouble. And as I was doing that research, I started understanding much better the role of the oligarchs and their role in supporting Putin and their role in the destabilization activities that Putin was carrying out in the West. And if you are an oligarch, then you have to have a yacht. They all have it. It's a status symbol. It's very important to them. And so as I was writing Victor in Trouble, I was developing a character who was an oligarch who was going to play this type of a role. And so of course he had to have a yacht. So I was doing all of this research on different yachts and learning about all of the crazy ass shit that they have on board, like anti-missile defense systems or escape pod submarines and dance floors that turn into swimming pools and billiard tables that are on gyroscopes so that you can use it even while you're out at sea. All kinds of crazy stuff that, only billions and billions of corrupt dollars can buy you. So I became quite familiar then with a lot of these yachts. And so then I live in Barcelona, and before the invasion, this is where a lot of those yachts were. They're not here now, but they were here before. And so I actually got to know some of them up close and personal. There was always a handful of them down at the port here. So as it became clear to me that Putin was going to invade Ukraine, and it became clear to me that we were going to start discussing sanctions on oligarchs, I started sort of highlighting some of the yachts, the Russian yachts that were here in Barcelona. And then by chance one day, one of them, Solaris, which is one of Roman Abramovich's yachts, was out running sea trials. And I tweeted about it and said, I wonder if it's getting ready to flee or something to that effect. And that tweet
is
ended
sea
up
trials
going,
is sea trials like
just to see if it was seaworthy. So it was a brand new yacht.
It's like basic checks and stuff.
Yeah, so just checking it, making sure that it was able to do everything that it needed to do before undertaking a long voyage, which in fact it ended up doing just a few days later. So the boat left, I think, on a Tuesday afternoon. And like Thursday morning is when the sanctions on Abramovich actually came down. So the boat made it out with about a 36-hour window and then made its way to Turkey. So that all of that is how sort of Yacht Watch began. And just given my background knowledge of oligarchs and of yachts, and then my proximity here to so many of them and being able to watch them as they fled, that's what led to the creation of Yacht Watch.
So if you saw a yacht that you suspected to belong to a Russian oligarch, what would you then do? Would you take a picture of it and then tweet it describing whose yacht it was and tag certain accounts trying to get their attention? Like how did that process of translating that skill to social media, how did you do that?
So I actually had sort of done Twitter tours of the port even before all of this. So just taking pictures of mega yachts down there. So not even necessarily Russian yachts, but you had American billionaires and Chinese billionaires and Arab billionaires and everything. So I would sort of just take pictures of them and put the photo up, usually with some kind of a snarky or sarcastic comment. But when it came to the Russian ones, it was more sort of highlighting the fact, they're here, right? So to me, the yachts really encapsulated and captured this idea of Russian corruption. So the oligarchs, on one hand, are allowed to loot Russia. They support Putin, and in their support of Putin, they are then allowed to loot Russia. But then they spend that money in the West. So they're supporting Putin and helping him destabilize democracy. But at the same time, they're parking their money and spending their money in those very same democratic countries and enjoying the benefits of democracy, the very same democracy that they are working to destabilize. And that hypocrisy and that corruption is really captured, I think, by the boats. And the yachts, of course, they capture the imagination of the audience because they are so big and they are so ostentatious. But then to me, they really are that symbol of that corruption and that hypocrisy that we need to address.
So was the actual parking of the Russian yachts in harbors like Barcelona, is that technically illegal and that's how they were detained, or how did you or how did law enforcement go about using their I guess their processes to detain the yachts? Like what was it that the oligarchs were doing that was against the law?
Well, there was nothing illegal about it at first until the sanctions came. But once these individuals were sanctioned, then their assets themselves were up to be detained. Now, there's a difference between detaining them and seizing them. So detaining them is you are a sanctioned oligarch, therefore we will freeze your assets. You're not allowed to use them because we've all agreed that you should be sanctioned. But there's only a few cases here in Spain and then in the United States where they've actually seized the yacht, which means it's now the property of the government. And so that's a very different thing. I think it's easier to think about it in terms of bank accounts, right? So if you sanction a Russian individual or any individual and you freeze their bank account, it's not that money now belongs to the government that has frozen the bank account. It just sits there. Nobody can use it. And so it's the same with these other assets, be it a villa or an airplane or a yacht. It's just frozen, which means the individual who owns it cannot use it, but it doesn't mean that it's actually owned and under the control of the government that has frozen it. So in a few cases, there have been legal cases that have gone through the courts where the courts have given permission for the government actually to seize it, and it then becomes the property of the government. So we have that now with 2 yachts here in Spain and 1 yacht which is now in the United States.
Yeah, what's the adage? Never buy a boat, just make friends with people who own them.
Yeah, it's much better because they're extremely expensive. And I think a lot of these governments are starting to realize, they didn't quite know what they were getting themselves into. The general rule of thumb is that the maintenance costs are 10% of the value of the boat. So, and these are Russian mega yachts. We're talking 500 or 600 million euros.
Damn.
And so you're looking at 50 or 60 million euros a year just to sort of keep it up. And, and so a lot of people out there say, well, why do we even bother keeping it up? Just let it rot. Well, of course you can't. If these yachts are in the harbor, they're here are surrounded by other infrastructure and surrounded by other boats. So they need to be maintained in a safe way. You don't want chemicals to leak into the water. You don't want an electrical fire on board, right? Which would set the entire port ablaze. So it really does require a certain amount of maintenance. And because these are such high-tech, big, enormous machines, it really does require everyday maintenance. If you think about your house and you just sort of stop taking care of it, it might last, a week or 2 weeks or something, but eventually things start to fall apart. And something like a yacht, that process is much faster.
And if people want to keep up with hashtag Yacht Watch, they can follow you on Twitter.
Yes, I am way too much on Twitter.
So as we end off, and again, thank you so much for your time. Where can people check out the book, your Twitter handle, website? And for people listening and watching, this will all be linked in the podcast description as well. But where can people check you out as we end off?
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm at Alex Z Finley, Z like Z, Alex Z Finley. And my website is alexzfinley.com. The books, Victor in the Rubble, Victor in the Jungle, Victor in Trouble, are all available everywhere books are sold, Amazon, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, all of the rest. But all of the information is on my website, alexzfinley.com.
Yeah, and like I said, the book is hilarious. I'm on the first one right now, and definitely go check it out. There are many laugh out loud moments, and it's really cool to hear the real life perspective that went into the satire in the book and kind of like the behind the scenes crafting of that creativity. I guess that's a test that the CIA could run for creativity, is like, how well can you use your experience in this corporation to write a novel series on your past experience?
That's it. Maybe they'll start putting me on the application now. People have to write a brief synopsis of a book.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thanks. I appreciate it.